Hello and welcome to the Kingdom Holocron. I am Lord Melmus, and on this channel my wife and I catalog the wholesome and cringeworthy tabletop moments in our favorite galaxy far, far away. We cover both mainstream Star Wars TTRPGs, the Fantasy Flight Star Wars, and the Star Wars role-playing game by Wizards of the Coast. Today we will be looking at a story from r/RPG Horrorstories titled Edge of the Empire Campaign Ruined by a Wannabe Jedi. I hope you'll forgive me, but before we go into it, I have to do the YouTube stuff. So please consider liking and subscribing, all the things that you're told to do every single video. And seriously though, subscribing would help me out a lot. But anyway, let's get into it. This story comes to us from Shock the Link, posted about 2 years ago. So, a little background for those who aren't familiar with the system. Fantasy Flight Star Wars RPG has 3 core rulebooks for the same game, each pertaining to a different aspect of Star Wars. Edge of the Empire was the first to release and focuses on the criminal underworld and fringes of space. Age of Rebellion came next and deals with the war between the Empire and Rebel Alliance and has more mechanics for pitched battles. Force and Destiny deals with the Force and those who use it. This game takes place after the destruction of the first Death Star. At least the core books do. There are books about running other eras. This is important to what happens. Oh boy, here we go. Now, I personally have DM'd and played Fantasy Flight Star Wars, and believe me, reading 3 different core rulebooks is a daunting challenge. And honestly, it's that curve that prevents people from getting into it. Well, that and the messed up dice system. But honestly, I think it's a very good Star Wars system. It lives up to the feel of Star Wars. And if you really want to cater your game to a specific aspect of Star Wars, its lore and its mythos, then there's an obvious reason why you would need different core rulebooks for different aspects of the way you want to play. Other core rulebooks that exist are for mainly the Clone Wars and prequel trilogy eras. They haven't done much into the Old Republic, but they probably will in the coming years. So on a whim, I bought the Edge of the Empire beginner game and quickly read over the rules. The dice were a bit confusing, and combat took a bit to get used to, but overall the system was solid. I grabbed one of my sisters and brother and we played through it, with me as the GM and them playing the pre-gen characters that came with the game. We had a blast. This is my first time GMing a game, and it left a positive result on me. And after my next paycheck, I bought the core rulebook and found as many of my friends as I could to play the game. Oh man, I remember my first time playing the beginner game. I mean, it's actually pretty cool. You have like 5 characters, if I remember correctly. 5 characters, you're all in service of a hut, and you all want to get out. So you all decide to go to the local cantina, but the hut has picked up on the idea that you're trying to skip out on him, so he sends his thugs after you. First thing you do is fight off a couple of Gamorrean guards, and then you go on your way from there. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And it ends up with with you guys stealing a starship and doing basically the TIE Fighter attack from A New Hope inside a YT-13. It's just awesome. If any of you are looking into it, I would highly recommend you go with the beginner game. It's awesome. Ultimately, I got 5 players in total. Evelyn, my oldest sibling and sister, played a Twi'lek smuggler. I played favorites a bit with her because I knew she could handle whatever I gave her responsibly. Grant, my youngest sibling and brother, played a Trandoshan bounty hunter. Spent the entire campaign becoming the best sniper he could. Jeremy, a good friend who played a human colonist. We rode the bus together to school, so he was the first player I asked to join, and I often bounced ideas or even entire plots off of him to see how they would fly. I trusted him enough not to metagame, and it went really well. Dave, someone I considered to be a friend at the time. I was supposed to play a human technician, the oldest out of our group, which made his behavior and eventual falling out surprising. I'm assuming this guy is the problem player. Bart, the person I knew the least. We homebrewed a Mandalorian hired gun. I had class with him, and he noticed me reading through the core rulebook and asked if I was running it. After I said yes, I asked him if he was interested, and we hit it off pretty well. the player with the most Star Wars knowledge besides me, which came around to bite me in the butt. We started by running the same starting adventure and went on from there. The first few sessions went pretty well, with the players escaping indentured servitude to a hut and catching a bounty that they were able to turn into Jabba, gaining underworld contacts in return. This is where the game opened up afterwards. With both underworld and Imperial contacts on their ship, all I had to do was ask them out of character what kind of adventures they wanted and build it the week beforehand. Everyone always had pretty good ideas, but Dave always wanted to do artifact hunting for lost Jedi holocrons and the like. Now, before the game had ever started, I told everyone that even though Force-sensitive characters existed as a mechanic in the game, we wouldn't be playing any because Jedi are rare, powerful, and everyone wants to be one. To also further my point, I pointed out how vague Force mechanics were in the core rulebook, and the fact that Force and Destiny wasn't out yet. Dave seemed a bit let down by this, but understood. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Even with the additional rulebooks out, the rules on Force abilities are still a little wonky. In fact, the way that the Force is done in Fantasy Flight is that it's very, I guess you would say, flavorful. You can go through these different skill trees through your powers and flavor it however you want, and specialize in different areas to make yourself stronger in different areas, but again, it's not all-encompassing. Every week, I rolled to see which suggestion I took, and the dice always seemed to favor Dave's suggestion. But I thought nothing of it. I had plenty of material to pull from, and these things fetched a considerable price. But Dave's character always kept a few items for himself. I didn't think anything of it at the time, because I was already flying by the seat of my pants in terms of story, and always gave out items I thought were cool, so I could impart my Star Wars knowledge on everyone. I do have to pause real quick and say, good on you, DM. After a while, I got sick of the serialized plot, and came up with a story to have them play so we could wrap up and play Age of Rebellion, since it had just come out and Jeremy wanted to GM it. The catalyst for the whole story was the discovery of a Jedi exile on Tython, the birthplace of the Jedi. She was there because she believed that in order for the Jedi to return, she had to bring them back to their roots, essentially starting it all over. The PCs managed to convince her to join their crew, and in return they would give her some of the artifacts they had found. And this is where things fell apart. The next session, I was continuing as normal when I noticed something was off. We were in combat, and Dave was using an ability I was very sure his class didn't have. I asked to see the ability, and when he handed it to me, I realized why he had been hoarding all those Jedi artifacts. He had been secretly making his character a Jedi this whole time, even going behind my back and putting XP into being Force sensitive. He had mentioned before that his character messed around with the stuff he collected during downtime, but I always thought that he meant he was trying to understand how it worked. I confronted him about this, and asked why he had only started using his Force powers now. He said that since we had a Jedi on the crew, he felt like his items were likely going to be given away, and felt this was a good time for his character reveal. I was pretty mad considering my one rule was no Jedi, and he had went ahead and changed his character without my knowledge, but he had spent all that time depriving other players of what they had wanted to do to further his goal. But Bart, whose character had gotten to know Dave's pretty well, defended his actions by saying that Force sensitives are a part of the universe, even pointing out that in the rulebook, you can choose to become a Force sensitive at any time to use like a regular specialization, basically a subclass. So I caved. And just had my players roll to discover this information, which all of them did. From there, the campaign went downhill. Dave kept insisting that since he was outed as a Force sensitive, by his own hand, he should get the exile as his master, and kept pushing for the crew to go back to artifact hunting, even though I had made it very clear that we were wrapping up the campaign and the PCs had to manage their time well. Eventually, I figured I'd been hard on Dave, and as part of the story I was spending one session at a time, wrapping up each player's story. So for Dave, I decided to send him on the sacred Jedi tradition of building his own lightsaber. Things went pretty well until we got to the crystal. This was before the current canon, so I rolled a percentile dice with numbers. 1 to 5 being purple, 6 to 45 being green, and 46 to 100 being blue. I rolled and he got a green crystal, and he was furious. Not immediately, mind you, I still had a younger brother at the table. But after the session, we went to a different room to discuss what his character would be doing leading up to the final battle, and he went off at me about how I had been ruining his fun from the beginning, and that I had forced him to go behind my back and make a Jedi, and how now that I had finally let him do what he wanted, I had made his lightsaber green. Oh, screw you. Green lightsaber is best lightsaber. Not to mention, in the actual Star Wars canon, green lightsabers are associated with sages and wise men, and people who look into the wisdom and mysteries of the Force. His character fits the type. I pointed out that since the Empire was keeping tabs on most places Jedi lightsaber crystals came from, he couldn't afford to be too picky. I even showed him what rolls meant what, to show him that the odds were actually in his favor, but he wasn't having any of it. Once he calmed down, he simply told me that his character was spending his time finding a blue lightsaber crystal. I wish I had more to tell you from this particular story, but that's where it ends on the RPG side. We never had another session after that because of that player, and Bart, who I will make a separate post about. The only thing I should add is that I actually hung out with Dave for a while after this because I genuinely thought that I was in the wrong for banning Jedi in the first place. But as I've been intentionally avoiding Dave ever since, he went on a rant about how he didn't think asexuality was a thing. I'm asexual, kind of glad he didn't know. TLDR, player wants to play a Jedi after I tell him not to, goes behind my back to make one, and even after I let him play a Jedi, isn't satisfied. I just want to point out real quick, OP, you did a really good job, and you're not in the wrong for banning Jedi in the first place. Trust me, it does get confusing. It really, really does. But the thing you did wrong here was cave. The thing is, when DMs cave into the desires of their players, things tend to go really bad, because then that player will walk all over everybody else because they know the DM's going to give them whatever they want. And everybody's unhappy, including the DM. So, stand up to your players, tell them no, and what I would have done personally is that I would have taken this guy aside and say, look, you can't use force powers because of the rules. But, as part of the end of your story, the Jedi exile on Tython discovers your force potential and says, hey, I'll take you on as a student. And then you use that as a trial to go get the parts for his lightsaber, and then that's the end of his story. It satisfies everyone, including yourself, and ends his character arc. But honestly, I think you're a really good DM. Now, in regards to lightsaber colors, the thing that he could have done was tell you, hey, I want a blue lightsaber, and that would have worked a lot better. But I do actually have experience with deciding what lightsaber colors to have. I was running a campaign with my wife and my brother-in-law, so her brother, and they went to a Jedi temple on Elam. Yeah, they managed to sneak past all the Imperial guards, but what ended up happening is that they went deep into the temple to an old Jedi forge, and they found crystals that were blank, and I kind of took them through a questionnaire of different choices for them to make in order to determine their alignment and what they would do with their reasoning while making those choices. And based upon that, I would determine their lightsaber color. My wife got an off purple because she made some both good and bad decisions, but kind of kept it in the middle. My brother-in-law, her brother, ended up making a lot of lawful choices, which I gave him basically a blazing orange color. I talked to them afterwards and they really seemed to enjoy it. So try something like that. Or if your characters really want a certain kind of lightsaber, then skew the odds in their favor a little bit. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Kingdom Holocron. Feel free to tune in on Fridays, as I'll be uploading more stories every week. Until then, I'll see you next time.